Hello, and welcome to the Sierra Speaker Series, brought to you by the California State Parks and the Sierra State Parks Foundation. My name is Denise, and I'm the Events and Communications Manager of the Foundation. The Sierra Speaker Series shares and connects the rich cultural and natural history of the Lake Tahoe-Donner area with the community. Please donate to the Foundation today to support the interpretation, restoration, and preservation of the park system in the Lake Tahoe-Donner area. Your tax-deductible donation will be kept locally and applied to priority projects. Please visit sierrastateparks.org to see how you can get involved and access upcoming events. With me today are Heidi Sproat and Barbara Czerwinski. Both incredible women are members of the Truckee-Donner Historical Society and volunteer researchers. They have put in a lot of time and dedication to bring us this informative presentation. We hope you enjoy it. Please take it away, you too.
Well, good. I'm in Frederick, Maryland, so I'm going to say good afternoon, everybody. And Barbara is in
Truckee, California.
Right. So this will be a bi-coastal presentation. And when we were discussing whether or not or how to start this and what we were going to talk about, we decided that some of the most prevalent questions we get have to do with many of the topics that we're going to be discussing. And I don't know how many are familiar with the top 10 version, but that's pretty much what we've decided to do. We're going to go from number 10 to number 1. And obviously we're going to hold questions until the very end, but please keep them in mind and we'll progress through this. All right, so we are with the Truckee-Donner Historical Society in Truckee, and we have been blessed with many, many donors who have donated images. And so far, we've been able to upload over 1,800 images into our collection. So please visit our website, truckeehistory.org, and go to the image collection to take a look. And if you have questions, you may email us at info@truckeehistory.org, and we will do our best to get your questions answered. Okay, the first one, the top 10 Truckee myths. That's what we're going to be discussing. And Truckee's population, people have often said, oh, it's remained pretty stable throughout the years. Truckee's population did increase, obviously, right around the railroad when the Transcontinental Railroad was coming through Truckee in the 1860s. And as most of us who have been longtime Truckee people, it's all because of the railroad. If the railroad had not come through this area, Truckee's population would probably not be what it is today. It was and was the biggest stop along the railroad between Ogden, Utah and Sacramento. And later on, towards the 1960 Olympics, which everyone knows took place in 1960 at Squaw Valley, Olympic Valley, the population has dramatically increased in recent years. But we wanted to bring you these historical references. If you take a look at some of the old time maps, they have a legend at the top. It's called Sanborn Map and Publishing Company. January of 1885, the population was 1,500. In December of 1890, so we're talking 5 years later, the population increased by, guess what? Just 100. There is a gentleman, Vlad Shurkin. He publishes many of the older maps. And as you go through the years, this is 1898, and take a look at this, Library of Congress, 1898. The population of Truckee was 1,200. Now think back to what it was just a few years before, 1,600. So the population did indeed go down. In 1907, it was 1,450. I'm not going to go through the rest of them, but you can see from the census records that we pulled up here, the different population numbers. And remember, the railroad came through in 1868. So if you take a look at this chart, which was put together by one of the volunteers for our Museum of Truckee History, you can see that the population exploded in 1990. Now remember, this map only goes up to 2020, and we don't have the numbers from 2020 for today's date in 2021. But I think everybody will agree it's gone up significantly. Again, take a look at the Winter Olympics. We're in 1960, which brought a short increase, a slight increase. and then it tapered off again. It wasn't until Truckee was incorporated in 1993 that the population really took off. And all these are available statistically in the census records. In 1993, Truckee incorporated after it was put to a vote, and it gathered 70% local approval at the time. Again, you can read this. It says most of those issues included land use planning, snow removal, road maintenance. And the joke by the mayor said there was a story about the highway patrolman who knew people were drunk if they drove straight down Jaboom Street because there were so many potholes you could lose your car in them. And this, while it appears to be confusing, is not. If you take a look here, this is Commercial Row on Front Street. All of these red arrows indicate buildings that were designated as saloons. Keep in mind, this is from 1898. If you were to walk down Commercial Street today, you could see what these buildings were then and what they are now versus what they were then. And I do want to just read this one section, short section. There's a book called Thompson and West, and it recounts a lot of the history of the area of Nevada County. And on page 76, I found this information about a fire in Truckee in 1880. People were trying, remember back in that time frame, the buildings were built of wood and they burned like matchsticks. Apparently there was a gentleman staying at the Truckee Hotel, was awakened in the middle of the night, found out that there was a fire going on, and he was a salesman for a local fire extinguisher company. He went out and put the fire out. And within a short amount of time, the entire town decided we need these and purchase them. I also included other fires because fire in Truckee then was due to lumber and it going up in flame. Today, obviously, we're all very concerned about defensible space and our individual responsibility to take that to heart for our own properties. Back then, the issue of fire was tantamount because there were early on no organized ways to put it out. And I have the actual article from the Truckee Republican in 1875 if someone would like to read it. But I thought that was just I read it, I said, what? They had fire extinguishers then. But this guy was doing a promotional tour across the US, stayed in Truckee overnight, realized the issue and came out with his extinguisher. Okay. Barbara.
The number 9 myth is icicles, and they are beautiful, but they're the perfect murder weapon. And so you have to decide if this woman is fencing with icicles or not. But this is one of the pictures from our collection. And truly about 100 people a year die because of an icicle in this country. And it is what is called the perfect murder weapon. And there are novels and stories about people being killed with an icicle. And so that makes it, living in Truckee, you have to be worried about roof slides that come in the wintertime when there's too much snow. And they, last winter, we did have one slide up in Serene Lakes where a young boy was trapped under the snow, and fortunately he was saved. Anyway, next slide. And number 8 myth is Truckee looks like Alaska and Canada and Russia. And this is true because many of the movies, over 115 movies, have been filmed in Truckee. A lot of it early on because of the winter scenes. And you can see various settings supposedly to be Russia or Canada or Alaska. The first movie that was filmed up here was in 1910, and it was a silent movie. And recently, the Hells on Wheels episode filmed Truckee as in Canada because there wasn't enough. Excuse me, Hells on Wheels episode was filmed about Truckee in Canada because there wasn't enough snow on that particular winter when they were filming. Next slide. Number 7 is a piece of the 1930, it's a 1936 original San Francisco Oakland Bay Bridge is in Truckee. Did you know that part of this bridge can be found in the Truckee Regional Park, and it makes the Truckee River platform for the railroad, the miniature railroad that's in the park. In 1936, the San Francisco Oakland Bridge was completed. 1937, the Golden Gate Bridge was completed. In 1938 to 1940, there was a Golden Gate International Exposition on Treasure Island. And recently, it took 13 years, but in 2013, they completed the redo of the eastern section of the San Francisco Oakland Bridge. And with the leftover or the old steel, some of it was allocated to being made into art forms. And this is Mountain Forge did this, what I call a little train station from the remains of the bridge. So we do have the Oakland, or the San Francisco Oakland Bay Bridge in Truckee. It's really very nice. And then number 6 myth is Truckee doctors are hicks. Now I must tell you, I moved to Truckee over 10 years ago, and one of the top reasons we chose to come here was because of the healthcare. As many people think, rural areas of the country don't have good physicians. Starting early in like 1868, the railroad, the Central Pacific, stationed physicians in Truckee for care and feeding of the railroad workers. There was a doctor named Curlis, and he responded to Mr. Titus's broken back. In essence, Mr. Titus had a dislocated back. He was driving a team of horses with beef carcasses to Reno, or the Nevada area, and got caught under an underpass, and the sled with the carcasses and all turned over, and he dislocated his back. And the doctor subsequently wrote it up in a medical journal of the railroad physicians, one of the first medical journals in the country, and how this man was saved, in that he was taken to a family's home here in Truckee and cared for some time before he could move. They turned him every so many hours. They did all kinds of things. It's a very, very interesting story. But Dr. Curlis was what you call an evidence-based trained physician. He went to Rush Medical School. And this was the era when we had physicians that were what I call on-the-job trained, such as they were apprenticed with another physician or a pharmacist. As you will find, Dr. Weber up in the Sierraville area, he was educated by a pharmacist on the East Coast before he came out to California. But anyway, the story of Mr. Titus is legendary, and it's significant because if you read the medical article, you'd wonder how Mr. Titus didn't become paralyzed. He subsequently was rehabilitated and went on with his life. And then there was Dr. Larry Nelson, who was also the physician for the Olympics. He was in the Truckee area in the 50s and the 60s, and he had a lawsuit because of the Southern Pacific avalanche in 1952, and he went to Chicago and testified that avalanche did not cause these people to have the problems they had. Avalanche is a natural occurring thing. He also was involved with a trucking accident over in the Squaw Valley area. And he went to Oakland, I believe, to testify. And the judge said, the defending lawyers came on him and said, you're, in essence, you're a hick doctor. What do you know? And one of the questions the lawyers challenged him is, do you know that the Giants, about Mickey Mantle? And finally, Dr. Lawrence Nelson said to the judge, no, I think Mickey Mantle played for the Yankees. Anyway, it's a funny story, but in essence, he did invent a weight-bearing lower extremity device. There are over 200 patents of inventors here in the Truckee area. So we have interesting people that have lived here and worked here in Truckee, but healthcare for general purposes, in my opinion, is relatively very good in this area. Next slide. Now, number 5 myth is we have 2 Chief Truckee plaques. This is true. Chief Truckee plaque was done by a sculptor named Roth, and he did 2 of them because one was placed here in Truckee and one was placed in Nevada, in Dayton, Nevada, where Chief Truckee died in Dayton. And so the clampers had 2 bronze plaques dedicated to Chief Truckee, and the one in Truckee is down in the regional park area off of Brockway, and it's called the Chief Truckee Park area if you want to reserve that part of the park. But anyway, it's just a very beautiful plaque, which plaques of this nature you don't see that often anymore. Next slide.
Okay. Some people are wondering, was Truckee Lake always called Donner Lake, or what is Truckee Lake? And the same thing with Lake Tahoe. People have referred to it as Lake Bigler. And when we were going through different sources, obviously doing different research projects, we realized that there were many lakes that were name lake and some that were lake name. So in going through these, we found out that the current Donner Lake used to be called Truckee Lake, and the current Lake Tahoe used to be called Lake Bigler. And this is a very generalization, because if you count the Great Lakes, they don't fit this pattern at all. But it tends to be based on the size of the lake. And if it's a natural body of water, it is generally a lake name. If it's man-made, it's a name lake. Again, there are all kinds of exceptions. There is a great article that distinguishes, and that you can read later on, about the differences between the two and why some are called lake name versus name lake. I'm going to read this. In 1870, we're talking now about Lake Tahoe. The lake was officially named Lake Bigler in honor of John Bigler, who was then governor of California from 1852 to 1856. However, Bigler was a strong secessionist during the Civil War, and having his name on the lake was unpopular. The official name on the maps published in California until the California legislature changed it in 1945. John Charles Fremont's expedition across the western portion of North America called the lake Mountain Lake, and there was even called Lake Bonpland in homage to Aimé Bonpland, a French botanist and explorer. And why does all this matter? Because when you start to look at some of the old-time lakes, and if you didn't know that Lake Tahoe was called Lake Bigler, you go, maybe I'm in the wrong place. But of course you're not. This is the dividing state line between California and Nevada. And some of these, it may be difficult to see, but this is the same thing right here. This is from the David Rumsey Historical Map Collection. And if you've never taken a look at this collection of maps, it's phenomenal. I'm a map junkie, and I love to go looking at what they used to call things. I have to tell you a funny story. When I first moved from California to the East Coast and then back again, people would always say, well, you know what, the old store at the corner that used to be there, I never knew what was there now, let alone what was there before. So what started me to look into this is that what did they used to call this? So instead of Lake Tahoe, it was Lake Bigler, and I ran into this sign in Kings Beach. I have yet to physically see it, but I know it's there. And again, here we have Lake Bigler. And here we have Lake Bigler or Tahoe. This middle map is 1865. The one to the left is 1854. This one is 1857. And take a look here where it shows Lake Bigler, Lake Tahoe's outlet appears to be in Nevada and not in California. Keep that in mind as you look at the outlet at Fanny Bridge in Tahoe City. And here it's Bigler Lake. So again, Lake Bigler, Bigler Lake, you decide. This might be hard to see. This is Truckee Lake. This is what Donner Lake is. This is from an 1857 map. Over here, this is also Truckee Lake, this little tiny thing. This is from 1866. So you can see it was still called. And if you didn't know some of the other areas, or you didn't know what county you're in, you go, what is this? Where am I? And I had difficulty with that, trying to figure out, okay, this isn't what I would have thought the lake would have been named. Okay, number 3. This is going to be difficult because we don't want to comment about how the 601 may have developed over time or perceived over time, but we encourage our readers to take a look at what transpired at the time of the events, which included the 1860s and 1870s. The 601 was not originally an organization designed to rid Truckee of the Chinese or any other nationality. Truckee was a lawless lumber town. And the original documents, if you go back and read the newspaper clippings and the editorials and the diaries and the, we found one other thing, it'll come to me. They were trying to get rid of what they called the undesirables, gamblers, backlegs, ruffians, tramps. And these are the words that they actually use: vagrants, drunks, jailbirds, pimps, outlaws, cutthroats, and toughs. The 601 was supposedly created. The concept was to, quote, purify Truckee by keeping the lawlessness down. One of their leaders, D.B. Frink, in fact, was killed by one of their own members. And if you look at the recounting of that in 1880, again, in this book called Thompson and West, The History of Nevada County, you can see that it was an attempt to keep the lawlessness down. Because the railroad came through it, it was an opportunity for people to come into town. And most people know about Jaboom Street and what the Jaboom Street represented. And there were many men for lumber and ice, and they needed some kind of protection. And the 601 were area residents who said, no, we need to stamp this out. Because at the time, Truckee did not have its own jail until 1875. So they were sending
no sheriff.
And no sheriff. So there was nobody to enforce what was going on here. So again, citizens took it upon themselves to say, all right, we need to get rid of this. We need to get a handle on the lawlessness and the drunkenness. And there are many period articles, which we're going to get to in a second, about how and why they did this. Again, 2020 hindsight may have different opinions of what this was, but at the time, this was meant to keep Truckee's lawlessness under control. And without commenting on the Truckee method or a boycott to use intimidation as a means of having the Chinese leave Truckee, they're two entirely separate concepts and separate approaches. And that didn't occur until much later than the 601 initiation did. One thing we did find in our investigation about Truckee and the word boycott. The word boycott came from County Mayo, Ireland, where, if you read this, an English absentee landlord called Captain Boycott expected his tenants to harvest his crops as part of their rent. The tenants refused to deal with them, and the word boycott was added to the English language. The landlord and his family were totally ignored, and their crops rotted without harvesting. So again, the 601 was initially designed to have some kind of law effect in town. All right. And these are different articles that you can pull up and take a look and see what they have to say. This is what, here it is. Man jailed in Truckee's Bastille. So this is after 1875, but look at the date. This is 1901. So again, take a look at what happened in the 1860s and early 1870s. And this is the article from Thompson and West I mentioned before. I've extracted it here, and I'll be happy to send it to anyone who is interested in reading the description. From 1880, which meant this is what happened obviously before in the 70s. So you have to look at the period literature to be able to make an informed decision about what transpired at the time. You can't do it 2020. And again, these are additional articles about the 601 and what they represented at the time, 1881 and 1907. Okay, Barbara.
Now, the rocking stone is number 2 myth. It is not one of 25 or 24. It's Truckee's fascination with boulders. The rocking stone tower is an altar, a druid shrine, a glacial erratica, or other. It is not put there by giants. Anyway, the Sanborn maps of the time, the early fire maps, are the primary source of this historic record. The rocking stone and tower balance, and as you can see in the 1898 McGlashan Waterworks, he had this drawn out, and by that time he had built a tower over the rock to house his Donner Party items from the families that he met from the Donner Party, plus his butterfly collection were housed in his rocking stone tower. The rocking stone tower had lights on it and lit up at night, so it was seen from the trains passing through the area. And one of the more interesting stories is we have rocking stones all over the world, and all over the Truckee area we have boulders. And one of the more interesting stories is the Methodist Church, or the Church of the Mountains, as they call it now, down at the corner of on Church Street, has boulders in the back that you can see from Donner Pass Road or Truckee Way. But also the church was built on top of boulders. And when they decided to add a basement or another floor to the church, they used some dynamite to try and blow that rock up. And it seems that the church organ of the time was replaced someplace else in the building, which caused a lot of problems. But eventually they did blast the rocks from the area and do have a basement in that church. But it's a fun story in the fact that they had to blow it up. Next slide, please. This is a picture of the balancing rock on High Street before it was enclosed as a tower. As you can see the hotel from here, way over here. Anyway, Mr. McGlashan bought this land from the railroad in the late 1890s and built his tower museum first before he built his mansion up there. Anyway, you can see this is what his mansion looked like before he built his house. And then the legend of the rocking stone is done by the Indian girl that lived with the McClashen family. She did this when she was at Meadow Lake High School about 1910. And as I said, this is an advertisement that Mr. McClashen used. Remember, he was a newspaper man, so he was good at doing ads. And the rocking stone is a natural wonder. It's glacial erratica, and it's this is a picture from the University of Nevada in Reno that we are able to use. But as you can see, there was a stairway up, and then an observation tower on top, as well as a light, and then occasionally he put the flag up there too. But this was the beginning of the winter sports. He created the giant icicle that you can see on your left, and that started the winter sports era that still is with us today in Truckee. Next slide. And this is what the mansion looked like. He built the mansion about 1902. In 1906, he put up the retaining wall because the mansion was sliding down the hill. And that retaining wall is still with us to this day. Of course, the mansion burned in October of 1934. And then the tower wasn't burnt at that time, but it disintegrated over time and was removed finally, all of it, in the late 1950s. In 1959 is what you see now is the steel gazebo-like area. This is a picture of the mansion with a retaining wall and the walkway across to the museum. And then the picture on your right is the 1934 fire. And we have to thank Sharon Arnold for her father's picture of that fire. It's one of the only pictures that we have ever been able to find of that event.
Right.
Next slide. So this is what the rocking stone looks like today. And this is courtesy of Greg Zerbel. He's been our photographer for almost all of the work that we have done for the Veterans Hall and this tower. And interesting enough, there are 14 pillars around this tower, and they all fit in the placement of the 14 pillars that were used for the original McClashen tower. So the base of this tower is what was there when Mr. McClashen built it. Okay, next time.
Okay. And we're just going to go through a couple of these different evidences of boulders around town.
I told you about the one that they blew out of the Methodist church in the basement. There are firewalls throughout downtown Truckee. You can see firewalls that were built out of rocks to prevent the fires from moving from one building to the next. Then we have Hooligan's Rock, McClashen's Wall, and Sierra College has rock pile that all have evidence of plug and feathering. Plug and feathering is an ancient way of coming from the Egyptians of splitting the rock so that they can build walls, or examples are the tunnels of the Chinese did. But all of this, you can see the actual
Let's see if I can find it here for you.
Okay, find the plug and feather.
Right here.
Here's a plug and feathering. This is the McClashen rock wall that you see today, and you can go up there and see the indentions. It looks like big fingers. That's where they put a chisel and they pound it in, and then that's what they fill with explosives like dynamite, and then blow the rock apart. And this rock, the McClashen rock wall that you can see now on High Street, you can go down to the Heidi, what's the name of that?
Good.
Hooligans
Good.
Rock, down
Yeah,
in
Hooligans
Safeway
Rock.
parking lot, and see evidence of this. This Hooligan Rock,
Oops,
back
here,
is back.
here.
Okay, this is part of Hooligans Rock. You can see that device still in the rock. And that rock has a plaque on it. And it was, it's now located in the Safeway parking lot. You know, there's a pile of rocks that you see that are there. Well, go over and take a look, and you can see the plug and feathering device that's still in there, as well as his plaque. This is a picture of Nona McGlashan. She's a biographer for C.F. McGlashan. She was his granddaughter that he adopted as his daughter. And then that's Lee Schlegg. The Clampers put this up. Mr. Schlegg did a lot of work with the Clampers. He is still around and is considered a Truckee historian. Anyway, the word hooligan stems from a English word from a particular area that was misspelled and then took on. So if you could see the explanation here, that since the hooligans have been referenced as to be aggressive, danger, violent, abusive, loudish, and other behaviors. Supposedly, Mr. McGlashan, when he was building his rock wall, this had been used to tar and feather people in this area. He asked that the rock be used for his wall up on the mansion. It's a very fascinating story.
And I'm just going to go back through just a couple of other examples of rocking stones or balancing stones. And at one time, the smaller stone on the rocking stone in the tower did rock, but it was becoming dangerous. So they anchored the base with cement. But if you really push, you might be able to move it a little bit. But
Don't
these
tell
are
people
different.
that.
Yeah. These are different examples of logans or balancing rocks or boulders in the area. These are from the Sierra State Park's DL Bliss. And I just got one of these recently. So, I mean, this is pretty, I wouldn't want to be down here if it fell, or during that last earthquake they had. And again, this is Boulders Road over off of Deerfield Drive. And this not rocking stone, this glacial erratic is huge. It's off of Ski Slope Drive. If you were to go up towards Tahoe-Donner, take a left on Northwoods and then take a left on Ski Slope. You can't miss it. It's not too far up the hill.
So the myth is busted.
Yes.
Truckee
not,
does. Okay, go ahead.
It's not one of 25. There are a couple other big rocks in the area. People have referred to Split Rock, and there's a great one at the Donner Camp area, right there in Donner Memorial State Park. However, in researching, we found this photo by Herman Kimball Gage, a noted Truckee photographer in the 1890s. And on the bottom, he has written, or someone wrote, Split Rock. And I said, this has got to still be here. Nobody moved this thing. And sure enough, if you looking around, we actually found it. It's over by the Tykert Ponds, which is again down Deerfield Drive, and it's south of 80. But this split is definitive. I mean, and take a look at the 1890, and this is 100 and almost 20 years later. So this is the real Split Rock in Truckee, not the one at Donner State Park. Sorry.
Well, and look at the trees. You can see the trees in the two photographs. They've, you know, just the size of the trees helps identify the place.
Right. And these
Beautiful.
are people standing here on the left to give you a perspective of how big this thing is.
Notice their
All right.
hiking clothes.
Yeah, hiking clothes, right. This was Hooligan's Rock that Barbara was mentioning, that's now at the Safeway parking lot. These are the old gateway cabins that were removed. And in one case, one of those cabins is now the Truckee-Donner Historical Society's Joseph Research Library, which is over at Donner Trail. So
On Meadow Park, in Meadow Park,
in Meadow Park, right. It's right behind the TDPUD building on that, and that's where the park is. And we talked about that one, and we talked about the plug and feather. And I just pulled these up because everything we read, we never saw that Truckee rocking stone was one of 25. There are many of these around the world. And a girlfriend is in Utah, and she sent me these because she knew I was looking for them. These were from publications. This was from an, I believe, early 1900 publication. How this stays up there, who knows, in Argentina. And I got a chance to see this one. This was in outside of Las Vegas in Valley of Fire. And if you do a search in Google and you put in balancing rocks or Logans, you can see the number that are around the world. We haven't counted them because usually they're in places that are not populated by people until more recently, and you find stuff. So you can take a look and see what else is out there. But if you find a good picture of a balancing rock, please submit it to us. And Barbara and I want to say the #1 myth in Truckee: Vets Hall is not a Quonset hut. Why? Because the term Quonset was not even used until the Bureau of Navy's Yards and Docks used that term in 1941, after the Navy was going to start ordering additional housing units for the military. And in doing so, they ordered Nissen huts. We hadn't even heard about this term until we found a very obscure University of Michigan PowerPoint show that explained that the Nissen huts were developed in World War I for housing soldiers. And the US caught on to this because they were inexpensive and they were easy to assemble. But the term Quonset wasn't used until late 1941. And there was a fabulous book, again, that we stumbled on that talks about Quonset huts and Nissen huts and the differences between the two and why there are differences. So we actually found the grandson of Nissen, the original Nissen, George Nissen, his grandson, George, for whom obviously he's named, communicated with us and explained to us, this is where it was developed. This is how it got across the US. It was not, Quonset was not a term used until 1941. And as we'll talk about in just a minute, the term, the actual description, architectural description of the current Vets Hall is not a Quonset hut. It's a Gothic arch in a simplified style, reminiscent of earlier aircraft hangars like Tillamook or later Quonset huts. But it's a Gothic arch building. And when it was designed by the first state architect, George Salon, in the late 1930s, Quonset hadn't even been used as a term. So we're trying to make sure that people understand, oh yeah, that's just a Quonset hut. It's really not. It's a Gothic arch Nissen hut. Okay, and we had the communication with Richard Nissen. Maybe it's Richard is his grandson. His son was named George. And okay, Barbara, you want to talk about the keeper?
The keeper.
Yeah.
Well, April 30th, our application for the Vets Hall and the Rocking Stone Tower went before the California historical people, and they granted us status that has to be registered with the National Historic People. And this takes about 45 days for the keeper to register this event in the National Register. So we will be celebrating in Truckee when we get the official word from the National Register that the Truckee Veterans Memorial Building and Rocking Stone Tower are a National Historic Site. We're so
Yay.
excited. Yay, team. What is so fascinating, we've learned a lot about the architect who designed this building, and this is probably the only building that we've been able to find that he did this way. He was the state of California's first architect. Remember, we had an earthquake in 1906? Well, after that, the governor at the time in 1907 decided we needed to have some standards and have a state architect. Well, Mr. Salon was over that program for 2 years, and in that time, he such notable things as Agnew State Hospital, San Quentin, some parts of Folsom Prison, all were inspired by his work. But he went into private practice after he left the state, and there are many things in Nevada County alone by this gentleman, including the courthouse in Nevada City, 3 veterans halls, our hospital here in Truckee, on and on it goes. But one of the things about the Agnews significant of his work is there is a road named after the architect, which is pretty unusual. He eventually did 6 courthouses in California, which is amazing. So we have a very special place here in Truckee for the Veterans Hall.
That's correct. And the last picture we'd like to show you is just the train. Remember, we started with this. It was all about the railroad. Had the railroad not come through Truckee, it may not have been the gateway to winter sports and continued population growth, getting people not only east and west, but north and south. Truckee is the focal point to be able to go down to Lake Tahoe. And as you can see, this is Vets Hall and the Rocking Stone Tower, the train in front. And this is the sign that's on the Rocking Stone now. But we'll have to wait until June 15th, which will be 45 days, to find out if the keeper in Washington, D.C. accepts our application for National Historic Status for these 2 buildings. And we both have to say, how did this all come about? One of our colleagues back in 2014 happened to find plans for the Vets Hall, and we took a look at the name, and we didn't really know a lot about him until we started researching. And then it was like mysterious, like there were all of a sudden there were all sorts of buildings popping up that had been designed by him. And courtesy of the Tahoe Forest Hospital maintenance manager who dug up the plans from Tahoe Forest Hospital, he also designed parts of that. So, and after Salon passed away, his firm was acquired and expanded, and the current architectural firm also designed Sierra College, Alder Creek Middle School, and several others in the area. So we encourage you that we are both with the Truckee-Donner Historical Society, and we are total volunteers, and we are always looking for people to assist us in either research or now with our new Museum of Truckee History downtown, which is open on weekends, Saturdays and Sundays only until we have more docents. But the Museum of Truckee History encapsulates a lot of different categories of information as well. So we hope you, and thank you for the Sierra State Parks Foundation for asking us to do this. And we hope you learned something. And if you do have questions or you want to contact us, please send an email to info@truckeehistory.org. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. And on behalf of the foundation, I just want to say congratulations on getting to
Yay!
Yes. It's a big step for sure, a milestone, and looking forward to celebrating that once that happens. And I do appreciate the meticulous attention to detail in this presentation. I hope that you all also enjoyed it. Let's see here. The Sierra Speaker Series was brought to you by the Sierra State Parks Foundation and the California State Parks. The Sierra Speaker Series shares and connects the rich, very rich cultural and natural history of the Lake Tahoe-Donner area with the community. Please donate to the foundation today to support the interpretation, restoration, and preservation of the park system in the Lake Tahoe-Donner area. Your tax-deductible donation will be kept locally and applied to priority projects. Please visit sierrastateparks.org to see how you can get involved and see upcoming events. If you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the comments and we'll be replying as they are coming in, or you can also email us. That's it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.